To inform you that this webinar is being live streamed on YouTube to increase access for countries that do not have access to Zoom. I thank you all for joining us, and I would like to now pass it on to Professor Salah.
Yeah, I would like to welcome the participant in this panel. Most, if not all, I've known and over the years and as colleagues in the field and also as artists. So let me begin as we actually decided to organize this panel. It's a round table, just for people to understand. So it's not necessarily based on consistent papers, although Professor Ray Silverman has a presentation to share with us, but we imagine it more dialogic than a series of papers. So we'll start with Helen Zeru Araya, who is born in Addis Ababa. I studied economics at Bahir Dar University before enrolling in Addis Ababa University of Fine Arts, from which she achieved her BFA in 2008. After graduation, she studied photography with Desta for Africa Foundation for 1 year, and we are glad that is the founder of Desta for Africa is also part of this panel. That is the artist Ida Mulani. Helen is an active member of Nesta Art Village, works as a studio studio artist and a freelance photographer, and also as an art therapist for several local NGOs. Helen works with photography, video, art, performance, painting, charcoal drawings. Her work also started as reflections of personal and emotional themes and end up with entering a broader social context, touching upon relevant and pressing issues. So Helen is going to start by doing a very short performance and then give a very brief presentation in relation to that. So Helen, welcome.
Thank you. No, she was just behind us. I was saying, you know, when it's like 8:39, everything is dark. There's no kind of outside like there are areas where we get one night, but very small area.
Maybe I will briefly explain. Hi, Salah. Hello.
Good.
So this performance is part of an enactment of a ritual ceremony that was performed on me when I was young, like 20-something years ago. So against for curing shyness, because I was painfully shy. And a shaman from the countryside came to visit my family, and he saw and he said, "Oh, I have this ritual ceremony that could cure her." So for me, it's also so I'm doing this performance purely based on what I remember the shaman used, like the elements that he have used all those years. So it's also in a way about memory, because from all those years, like it's 20 years ago, so every time you try to remember something, it's changing a little bit. So in a way, we are introducing different mistakes, or you change, I don't know, the memories are changed a lot. So it's also in a way to see like if this ritual ceremony I remember it had some kind of like a reaction at the end of the ritual. Of course, the shaman was also preaching or enchanting some things. So also to see if it would have the same reaction as it had 20 years ago. And also to see in a way as well, because there's like in the mainstream art media like this, there's a way that we see these rituals as it's something like uncertain, or what do you call it? Yeah, so yeah, it's also to see, because there is also a certain kind of precision in the ritual ceremonies. And the audio that you heard was also from a recording from markets place. So it's a combination of those two, but I would explain, because my what I want to talk a little bit about today was about formal and informal art spaces and institutions. So to and to see how this like, because I want to start with Naza Art Village. I was part of a like this artist collective that was founded in 2008 with 11 artists, and so seeing Naza Art Village as an informal art space, because most of our members were also, they came out of like a formal art institution, and to see, because the majority of the economy in Ethiopia, in countries like Ethiopia, the economy is majority informal. So to see how this informal economy could be a supportive structure for the informal art spaces. So I will just explain a little bit about Naza, and then see how it's related to the state, and what were the requirements of existing as an artist collective or as an art institution. So we were like 11 people, and it kind of grew towards the end, and we kind of existed for about 7 years until we were asked to move from our location, because it's part of the city gentrification that has been happening in Addis for the last 15 years. And so we have hosted events. We worked with a community that was where we were located at. So our idea was also to, because it kind of happened organically, how we came together, and it was in a way informal, but to exist and function and to host events or to do public programs, exhibitions, we were required or asked by the government to register formally. So it's also, and the process of registering was, I'm sure Ida also with your space, that there were only a few options. So the one option was a membership registration, and the other was like a PLC, a private company, and the third one was an NGO. And we were not, to begin with, we were a membership group, but then of course even if it's a smaller part of our collective, like to sell works, or if there was any kind of exchange money or funding, that we cannot do that as a membership. So we decided to be an NGO. No, sorry, PLC, because we didn't want to be an NGO, because also, as we all know, that the stigma related to an NGO, and I can explain a little bit as well, because at that time, I think there were new rules in regards to how the NGOs would function within Addis Ababa, especially NGOs that might be working on like human rights and all the issues. So there were limitation on what you can work with, and also there were limitation of what kind of support you can get within the country and from outside, especially as an NGO. I think if it's locally based NGO, there was maybe 20% you can get from outside, and 80% you have to raise from within. And it was, there were no art support or fund from the government at that moment. So we didn't choose to take that path. So we became a PLC, and so we kind of registered as, maybe I can see my notes. And also to just see, like, so because as an informal space, that there were ways where we could find or work together with the informal economy and space. But there was a requirement of registration, but when we are formally registered, so we no longer have that support of the informal economy, but also we were not supported by the formal art institution. So when I meant like formal art spaces or institutions, so that's the official way, like it was established or established and communicated through ways where it's widely accepted as an official. When I say informal I meant that not in an illegal way, but it's a set of like socially shared rules, but they are not largely they are not written laws or something, but we kind of work or understand as a community together. So that was, I mean, as an informal. So after the 7 years of our existence as a collective, we were asked to move. So this also shows a way where how one-sided was this has this process been, because if you're registered, it's in a way of like a commitment, no? Then and if you are asked to leave, or if you're kicked out without any support from the government, and it was not reciprocated, or in a way, that's what I mean. Yeah, I mean, I can say a little bit about the state skepticism or paranoia, because like having these rules as well as one way of there are two folds how the state was seeing the art spaces. Like one was also because we have to register to, like, the state only trusts its own making, you know. And the second one would be like to direct this informal economy into like a formal, like the currency, the informal currency could be redirected to the formal currency of the state. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, it's also in a way just find the great skill of the informal, and what can we take about this between these two spaces or institutions, with the formal and informal. What can each learn from each other? Because in a way, like, I don't think it can exist individually, like, because in a formal art spaces or institutions, that there are an informal way of doing things, and also in the informal art spaces that there are, because I mean we still exchange with like a formal currency, and also there are a lot of formal ways of doing your engagement and working with community. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Helen, for this brief, but actually very enriching, because you raised a lot of interesting issues. Even though you are as an artist, engaged with photography, but you're also engaged with the genre of performance art, from kind of engaging, you know, beside the body and everything, but also the rituals, this kind of ritualized performances that you import from your childhood. And that's, of course, falls into this kind of new conceptual practices within urban environments in Africa. You've also raised the issue of collective and collectivities, which is also interesting, because that's what a lot of artists resort to, especially younger, in terms of finding a space, because of the lack of formal spaces, even though there are admirable efforts by artists to try to self-organize. So that's one. And you also raised the issue of the informal economy, but larger than that, the issue of gentrification, which is many post-colonial cities now within the context of crisis and neoliberal development are actually, engaging. Artists move into a space with cheap rent, and they get moved when the place become a prime real estate. It happened in the West too, I mean, in many places. So anyway, we'll get back to it. I just wanted to, just highlight this point in your presentation, and then I'll introduce our next speaker or panelist. That is our dear friend, Ida Mulani, who is a highly, I would say, a true cosmopolitan artist, who was born in Addis, but grew up in multiple places, from Yemen to the US to Canada and other places. What distinguishes Ida from other artists from her generation is that she's not only an artist, but she's also an institution builder, and successfully so. She established, beside her own, of course, career, she established this Addis Photo Fest, which is in, I think it is in 10th year now, anniversary, and it has been an institution and a unique of its kind because it's the only probably photo festival beside Bamako Biennial. Bamako is in West Africa, and of course, Ida brought the first one in the context of East Africa, and it became developed a reputation and a status within the art world. Ida, after growing up in many places, studying in the US at the historically Black institution, Howard University, she studied film and media there. She decided to return to Addis, like many other diaspora people, when things opened up, and established the Addis Photo Fest that I mentioned, and its corporate wing, which is DESTA for Africa. And that actually definitely provide a kind of, in the absence of a formal support, one way of supporting existence. I just want to add, it's something we highlighted many times, is that there is a major survey of Ida's work in Sharjah here, organized by the African Institute in collaboration with the Sharjah Art Biennial, and the Sharjah Art Foundation and the Sharjah Art Museum. I wish for it's extended until the end of the year. Hopefully, the pandemic will ease and travel actually open and you can see it. And the catalog itself is available online for those of you. If you go to the website of the African Institute, you can download it. And if you need a hard copy, we're happy to provide one. Just contact us with address and everything. So welcome, Ida. The platform is yours.
Thank you very much. Salam ta Helen. Salam ta badam. Thank you very much, Salah. It's a great honor to be here and to discuss, my big passion project, which is the Addis Photo Fest. As Helen mentioned, I think one of the great challenges that we always face is really the question about space. For many things that have been happening in Addis Ababa, the most interesting for me, even surveying since my arrival in 2007, is the increase of art activities and public performances that have been taking place. However, the major challenge that we face is always getting support. And often, I think the key thing that we've understood in Addis Ababa, and Helen will agree to this, is that visual arts are rarely supported, but performing arts are often supported. So when you look at music concerts and these kind of shows, they will receive that funding from the corporate side, especially the beer companies were big in supporting that. But the key challenge for us, besides this space, is also getting that support in order for us to carry on the activity. So in regards to the Addis Photo Fest, it's a photo festival that I started in 2010 to have really a discussion as it relates to how can we engage the public, and also to encourage the photographers of what is really the role of photography from around the world. So initially, when I started the festival, the key goal for me was really how do we engage photographers from around the world, but at the same time as well, how do we support photographers in the continent in order to develop their work to a much larger audience. So through the festival, it wasn't just an exhibition only. We were doing a portfolio review. We were doing, workshops. We've had screenings, panel discussions and so forth, because I felt that in a festival, we have to embed educational components. And in the course of doing the festival, what has been really fascinating is really the level of photography that's coming out of Ethiopia and also the region and the continent, but also that a lot of young people come to that festival one year and the next edition, they'll end up submitting their work. So we've seen the growth of photographers. So just to give you a number, last edition, we exhibited about 156 photographers from about 63 countries, which is not exactly an easy feat to complete. There are many challenges that we face in our country, but I've always believed that regardless of the challenge, we have to find a way, to sort of address finding solutions through that. So through this experience, even the Sharjah exhibition is also doing a survey of photographers from different parts of Africa that I wanted to share to the Middle East community, because I felt that it was important to see not only the work that I'm doing, but also to see what photography looks like from Africa. So there's a lot to discuss within that, but the key thing is really the question that I always have is, what is the future of the creative industry within our country? And what is it that we need to do to move it now to the next phase?
Fantastic. Are you, okay. Thanks for this brief. And I think in the discussion, there will be a lot. And as I alerted people, that is your practice is, has been, exhibited in many places, but just highlighting and the latest show. And I think one thing I forgot to mention is that you can actually go into the website of the Africa Institute or the Sharjah Art Museum or the Sharjah Art Foundation and actually do a visual tour, which we resorted to in the context of the pandemic. And it was actually very well done, thanks to Satan and the company that actually did it. Helen gave us a very good glimpse of younger artists who are engaging with art practice in Ethiopia. And the difficulties and the challenges and the successes, the difficulties they face and the strategies for success of practice that they follow. And one of them, of course, is collectives or collectivities. So I want to ask on this, you can answer this question after I finish my comment, Helen, is what makes you move from photography to this kind of ritualized type of performances? I would like to know why. And then also more just on the engagement with collectivity or collectives and how that is, the challenges to it and the successes. So that's one. Ida's presentation really gave us another aspect of the Ethiopian art scene or the state of visual art. That is for an artist to engage as a practitioner, but also to engage as an institution builder. And I think you've talked about all of these things, and I wondered if you can just reflect briefly after I finish my last comment, which will be on Ray's presentation, is what I know there are challenges that you spoke about, but I'm wondering what are your strategies now? I know that you moved your practice or your some of your work into in Ivory Coast, and also you still maintain a space in Addis, but you're trying to strategize to try to continue your work in pedagogy and training of a younger generation, but also your own practice. I wonder how that is working for you, and if you can give some at least reflections on that. For Ray, I think you brought our attention to something that is actually, I find it unique within art history, is that when I entered the field in the late 80s, early 90s, there are two types of art historians, younger ones, mostly Africans, entering the field, but insisting on studying and teaching the modern and the contemporary. And then an older generation of Africanists who insist on that similar, typical approach of really focusing on the classical tradition and so forth. But there's, in the middle of this, of course, there's something in between, which is what happened at the level of other genres, what you can classify it as, pop art, or there's so many ways of classifying what vernacular and so forth, that you are engaging with something that is bordered on modernity, but also bordered on tradition. And then at the same time, one of the, actually, I don't want to take away from his questions, that is Gosa Oda pointed to the idea of the classical study of Walter Benjamin, art in the age of mechanical reproduction, which is what really kind of put emphasis on these or made it easy for people to acquire these, pop art or, reproduce, kind of images that changes the terrain. So my question to you is that is what really drove you to enter into that? Because that's a terrain that I actually feel students must engage in. Like after being engaged in contemporary and modern for a long time, teaching, I feel that is also to the neglect of like actually engaging with the classical tradition, but in a new way that move it from the either this thick ethnographic description and or the other terrain of it is just to think of them as object of art. I mean, what is it that art historian could bring into this kind of contradiction or paradox of emphasis on this from older generation and this and emphasis on the contemporary modern from mostly African, Africanist of African descent who are engaging in the contemporary. And I think it's just because they don't see urban Africa, they don't see modern Africa as part of that debate. And that calls for a change in of course, approach on both ends. On the side of people who study the modern and on the side of the people who study the classical tradition. So what the question for you is specific, is that what is, in your presentation, you seem to have focused on the Orthodox tradition. I wanted to just give, and I'm not sure if I'm not really an Ethiopianist, but it's a place I follow, so friends and artists and colleagues, is that there is other churches that are competing. The Pentecostal tradition, there's also the Catholic. And that actually somehow threatened the tradition that came mostly from the Orthodox Church. And also the earlier link, because there was a question, and I maybe just throw it here to think about it from Gosa Oda, who talked about how like there's a gradual whitening of the image of Mary and others. And he think that is had to do with two factors. I mean, what he talked about in terms of mechanical reproduction and the availability of those images from abroad and the accessibility, but it's also, I think there is something more here at play than just that one. And I think it had to do with the, like when you think about the diaspora, like in the Black tradition, there's much more movement to Africanize Jesus, to blacken Jesus, to say that Jesus was not really this hippie looking, blue eyes, long hair, blonde one, that Jesus must be from the Middle East, he must be looking like the people in the Middle East. While in Ethiopia, and in some other African countries that are engaged with these evangelical Western ones, there is a move towards actually whitening Jesus. So I stop here and I start with Helen. And please just be brief because we really wanted to engage the other questions from the audience.
Yeah, I think, yeah, when I was about to graduate, like the School of Fine Art, that I started with photography with Aida, like, so it kind of really opened my eye to the practice of photography. Like, so it's nice that Aida is here. I want to say that I haven't shifted from photography to like ritual practice. So I have been working with different mediums even before. So in a way, I could, it's like a translation of forms. So if I, let's say if I started performance work, then I would translate this work into like a photography work. So trying to see what of the forms which were present in the performance could be translated into the photography form. So, or if it started as a photography and I do drawing of the work. So it kind of goes through different medias. So, so I kind of play with all this media and forms. And the second question was about the, I guess, the challenge and the success of Naz Art Village or being collective. I think there are, like, I see it in two parts because so there were an internal challenges and successes and also external one. I think earlier I focused on the relation between the art space and the state. So I guess I think the biggest challenges that we had internally was to have like a common goal. I don't think I don't know if it's possible to have a common goal as an art collective. I think that was one of the biggest challenges that we had, because I think each member or each artist had a different, like their own visions of how the space or how they see the space. So I think it kind of created some sort of friction, and together with the destruction or like the gentrification of the space, it became kind of one fit the other, I think. And I think we did such a successful projects for really long time, because like for 7 years internationally, like like also inviting artists from the East Africa, doing workshops, and so it kind of had grew into a bigger, vibrant art space. But also, I have to say, everybody was an artist, so we didn't have like an manager of the space or accountant or all these things. So we had to do everything ourselves. I think that could be also some space or like a lack that could create in the space.
Aida?
Yes. So I actually had a lot of comments for Raymond. Just to track back in regards to my practice, you know, I spent a great deal of time digging through archives and also looking at things of the past when it comes to my artistic expression. And within that, I have a big influence that comes from the Orthodox Church as an Orthodox myself. If you look at my colors, it's actually it stems deep within the church paintings. And that's really, I find myself to be maybe an extension of the form that you're speaking about. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is that when you're discussing this question of the whitening of these images, my work is specifically also about representation and also diversifying sort of our existence within this global scheme of image making. So the question that you raised when, you know, why are there white Jesuses in Ethiopia when our history is actually much more richer than that? This is actually the same exact question that I raised. And I just want to make this point for an audience that might not know Ethiopia or has been in Ethiopia. When I ask this question to my relatives, you know, I have a lot of priests in my family, there's like a disconnect. They don't see the white Jesus, they just see a figure, you know, and I don't know if you've actually explored that or if you've actually discussed this. And I found this fascinating that in the conscience realm, it's irrelevant for anyone who has these objects in their house. Even for me, a lot of these images that you've shown are actually things that I grew up with. They're actually recycled from the past maybe 40 years. So there's a lot of images that have been reproduced over and over again. And I think there's a gentleman, Oda, who was talking about the reproduction. Yes, it's a question of reproduction. But the key question and why I just want to state this is, you know, artists such as Taddese and Mazgabo have had a huge influence on many of the artists that came out of the art school. So let's not negate the role of the art school. I think the key question to me in this representation is the question should be raised with the patriarch. Why is there a whitening of these figures in our churches? Which is something that I raise. But I am someone who's educated abroad and comes from, you know, sort of a multitude of backgrounds and what have you. But within that, when you bring this up, you know, within my practice, to me, you know, entering into photography, running a festival, the key element for me was that I wanted to not only educate my own people about the representation of who they are within the context of images. So I don't need to talk about, you know, the cliche image of Ethiopia, which is always, you know, what the media portrays. But I really wanted, you know, for photographers to have an understanding of, first of all, the role of photography. Second, how it's a tool that actually disseminates a lot. And at the same time, also, it's a powerful tool that also educates not only ourselves about each other, but also how do we educate the world of who we are really, you know? So through the Addis Photo Fest, you know, one of the key challenges, and there hasn't been a festival or a year where we have not had challenges. There's always a challenge. This is the reality of being and working in Ethiopia and Africa. But I'm really not a person who wants to speak about the challenges. I'm about finding solutions, and I work towards solutions. And these are the things I think as young artists, as cultural workers, entrepreneurs, however you want to categorize us in the continent. And for those that are listening abroad, is that we are looking for partnership that offers us solutions. So in the case of Nez Art Village, I was there. I've seen the growth of Nez Art Village. I've seen the challenges that Nez Art Village faces and all the challenges and everything that they had to endure. But the first step is that who came to aid? That's the key thing, you know? This was a grassroots space, a grassroots approach to engaging the public with art, just as the Addis Photo Fest did. But the key thing is that it always comes back to the accountability of leadership. So just as in Raymond, when you talk about the church and the white paintings, it comes back to the leadership of the church. Why are we sort of creating these images? And then when you talk about any kind of cultural space or any kind of activity that takes place in Ethiopia, it always goes back to the accountability of leadership and the kind of support that we see. Granted, now, for example, I'm very much interested to go back to Addis Ababa to see Unity Park and also to see the Entoto Park that has opened up spaces for exhibiting. I'm very curious about that. But within it, you know, my existence also of coming to Cote d'Ivoire is really, I've never been only about Ethiopia. My main interest has always been across Africa. You know, I find myself very privileged to be able to live anywhere in the world, but my passion and my heart has always been in the continent. So me coming to West Africa is also to initiate and activate things in West Africa to actually build this bridge between East and West. Because often, and Helen knows this, you know, for example, you know, we have a lot of Sudanese artists that come to Ethiopia and exhibit. We have Kenyans, Uganda, you know, there's all these, the regional artists, but rarely do we have opportunities really to bridge a gap throughout the continent. And to me, what I try to tell young photographers is that, you know, first you need to know your country, then you need to know your continent, then you start exploring beyond the continent. And me being in West Africa is just to show that, yeah, I could be comfortable in Europe or I can be comfortable in the West, but I find that the inspiration still remains in the continent. And I'm not able to create in the same way if I lived outside of the continent. So for me, you know, even in traveling and, you know, exhibiting in different parts of the world, my key interest is, you know, when there's an invitation in the continent, regardless of the conditions, I will go because I know I will learn something completely new that I haven't learned anywhere else. So in that sense, you know, when we speak about cultural spaces, everything also comes back to the educational system at the end of the day, which means that, you know, we are in a generation now that when we speak about education, it's not just about the exhibiting artists or creating work, but also to teach our students, you know, the business side of it and to understand its implication of work within spaces as well, to understand how our work also reflects to the global community. So through that process, to me, doing something like the Addis Photo Fest, you know, some people ask me why I do it and why don't I just remain an artist? But to me, it's actually an artistic extension of myself. And this is how I see it. But at the same time, my motivations are quite clear because what I look at is how do I take not only photographers from Ethiopia, from across Africa, how do I take them to the next level and how do I push them into the international realm? But at the same time, understanding sort of our psyche of who we are as Africans and also understanding how the world also perceives us and how do we navigate through these channels and how do we enter a market that is heavily white, heavily male, and one that dominates, you know, even creating our own perceptions of who we are.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I want to bring in like several people who actually raise their hand. So it's Elizabeth, Georges. I will answer, we'll respond to some of the people who posted questions, you know, to be fair. But Elizabeth and Doug, raise your hands.
Okay,
and I'm also
sorry.
ask questions. Elizabeth?
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm here. I just want to give a comment. First of all, thank you for Helen, and Helen is, you know, is a very good performance artist. Does a lot of work on disenfranchisement. So she's a young artist, but doing many things. And Ida's Photo Fest, the Addis Photo Fest, since it started, it has galvanized a lot of activities around that, and a lot of photographers have come around the Addis Photo Fest. So I thank her for that too. And she's explained it very nicely what Ray had presented.
I mean, I think it was more like a very continuous negotiation and also reconfiguring ourselves as a space, as not only like aesthetically but also where we stand politically. It was a continuous. I think that's how the survival of the thriving became. I think it was a continuous negotiation, a continuous, but also. I think, because even though we were formal registered, our way of working was informal. I think informal have a way of like being very persistent, I think, more than formatting and and it was also a good way of finding ways of working the system. And I think after our space was kicked out, after we were kicked out, there were a lot of branching out of collectives that have formed. Let's say the NAS Art Gadam, which was in Piazza now, like 3-4 of our former collects are now together, working together. And also recently the what was the Maddamer Africa is also another space where our former members are working together. So kind of have branched out into different spaces, which is a very good thing. Yeah, that's.
Aida, thank you so much, Helen.
Yes.
I don't think there was a question for me, or was there?
Okay. No, if you, I mean, I'm just giving kind of like almost a semi-concluding remark. If you have a chance to do it, if you have any.
in 1 minute? Yeah, sure.
I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
Since you're now working in Cote d'Ivoire, could you say something about the differences in terms of the art communities in Abidjan and Addis Ababa?
I mean, there's a lot to discuss about. I mean, that I can't do it in this 1 minute, but we have to remember, you know, the colonial history does make a big difference. You know, I find that in West Africa or in Cote d'Ivoire, which still has a very strong hold of the French, a lot of artists are funneled to the French system. And this is why I was saying, like, working in the continent, what is so important is that there's a lot of experiences that we can share. And there's always this divide between Francophone and Anglophone Africa. So for Ethiopia, the main challenge is that we were never colonized, really. And our connections is not to really anybody, you know. So where we navigate towards is really based on what opportunities are there. So there isn't really this colonial history or this one path that we look towards. But the one thing I do find, this one thing I wanted to tell you, Raymond, I don't know if you've ever seen when the art school does an exhibition of all the students from, not all the students, but a selection of all the years of the art school. And it's really fascinating to go through that collection, because you look at the inception of what artists were producing in the beginning at the opening of the art school, and then this progression that happens. So for example, when the Derg enters, you see a lot of this, like, you know, socialist paintings and graphic stuff that comes in. Then you have the current government. So there's always this shifting. And this is why I wanted to say, in regards to these in regards to these church paintings, it's also this evolution of what we perceive as having value, you know? So by raising this question to me, that's why I said, you know, this representation is quite key, and to have this discussion of us being Africans as well. So for me, being in West Africa, it's really to encourage Ethiopians also to travel across to other places in the continent and to kind of bridge these gaps. But within the art activities, each place is unique because it's a different culture. For example, I can tell you in Cote d'Ivoire, there's a lot of detail into handcrafts, which we don't really see in Ethiopia on certain objects, because we're not really traditionally people that always, you know, we work mostly with textile and so forth. But within the contemporary art movement, there's a lot of interesting things happening here that I feel that, you know, this is why I'm here as well. Not only, you know, here, but also existing between these two places of Ethiopia and Cote d'Ivoire.
Thank you so much, Aida. Okay, so let me just attend then, to be fair to the attendees. I think Gosa Oda, most of the question you've asked, I've actually acknowledged and credit you for the questions. I would say, to be fair to you, but there is a question from Eden Abate, who said, question to Helen, is the ritual you perform connected to a specific region? Could you please share? Question to Aida, what is your advice, or maybe 2 key lessons learned that you could share with us for diaspora that are now back in Ethiopia engaging in the arts sector? And then he asked both of you a question that I hope he can come up with an answer to, because he asked you about funding and what you need. And I hope you have some funding to give Eden. But anyway, I'm just kidding. So if you, this is one question. I mean, I think some of these questions you've answered, but if you have any added, very briefly, Aida or Helen?
who is this that was asking the question? I'm trying to look
He
up.
was asking both of you. He asked Helen about the region of the ritual that you've used in your performance. That's a specific question.
Yes. It's like a northern, my family are from the northern part of Ethiopia, so it's a ritual of a northern part, but as I said, it also works with memory, so it's not the exact representation of this specific ritual performance, because also I'm doing it not in that religious or ritualistic space, but also in a like in an art context, so aesthetically, and I have added my own rituals as well. So it's not a repetition of the same, but it's mostly from the northern part of Ethiopia.
Yeah, Oda just posted something about he wanted to understand the shamanistic part of your practices. And I think you probably answered it, but if you wanna, maybe for the sake of clarity, just say something more.
What was the freeing space made possible by the shaman practice? Maybe I'll get back to it if we have time.
Okay, but I think you have alluded to it in your own. So is there, okay, I'm just trying to find the...
Can I just respond to the question?
Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
So Raymond, in regards to your question about Black Lives Matter in Africa, I just want to state in my conversations with young people here in Cote d'Ivoire, since this is where I am right now, the perception that we all have is that if we're going to talk about really the liberation of Black people, it's a global conversation. The inception of everything that happens in the US started in Africa, which I don't need to tell you, through slavery. The conditions of what's happening in the US is really, let's look at the base. So imagine as Africans, when we talk about the end of colonial power, which really has not ended, that's what we're looking at. So when I think African Americans are talking about Black Lives Matter, I think they need to come to Africa and see the basis of what it's like to be in what you consider to be your own country, but still dealing with oppressive forces, as opposed to being somewhere else that you were taken by force. So there's a lot of discussion within that. In regards to questions from Aiden, as far as being a diaspora and coming back to Ethiopia, I mean, it's not for the faint of heart to come back home. I left when I was 5 years old. I was very privileged that my mother made sure that I knew the language because in our home in Canada or wherever, we weren't allowed to speak English in the house. So I found this to be such a powerful asset. But having grown up as an immigrant, an Ethiopian especially, the main challenge of going back to Ethiopia was I had to relearn the culture. So a lot of the times, I think with the Ethiopian diaspora, we make this mistake of thinking that we know everything, when in reality, we should come into our own countries and relearn, relearn our culture, relearn what are the context of the local realities, what are the challenges and so forth. And normally it takes about 3 years. If you can survive 3 years, then you're okay. 3 years is usually the end of that marriage that people usually go back. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that is needed because I believe that you will learn more by coming back to your country and going through these challenges than if you stayed in the comforts of wherever you are, as I mentioned earlier on. The other thing as well is that in regards to funding, I mean, it's very challenging to find funding, but I would suggest, organizations like, for example, the Prince Claus Fund was one of our bigger funders who really have supported. Also Open Society out of New York is also a funding structure. So there are different funding resources that exist, but they're not in the country. Now, if you're looking for funding resources in the country, then you're going back to the foreign cultural institutions, but that usually has, some restrictions and so forth. What you can do very simply is just go to the Addis Photo Fest website and just look at who are the different funders that we have used in the past. And all you have to do is just Google and you can see sort of online, what they make available and what have you. And then I think, and in regards to, I think, engaging the arts sector, I mean, there's a lot of activities. There's more artists now than before. There's more institutions, there's more galleries than we've had before. But the key thing is build relationships and networks.
Okay, just I want to apologize. There's so many people who raised very interesting questions, and we can go all night. I just want to end by saying just few things. I mean, one of them is the issue of color. I think it's important to look at the literature, especially like Rolf Trio, who talked about the issue of color globally, is that, and I want to relate it to the response to Black Lives Matter in the context of Africa itself, is that there is a hierarchy by the very fact of colonialism and slavery and so on. So it's targeted a specific race, and that is the epidermal schema happened to be Black. And that is, of course, compounded by so many stereotypes and so forth, and a certain ideology that dehumanize these populations and make them vulnerable, or at least at the level of ideology, vulnerable to being dehumanized, as the West has done this since the maybe 17th, 18th, 19th century. So there is a hierarchy that developed, which is from that the lighter, the better. As Robtio would say, I mean, so there's a whole caste system that entered into the formula, other than just slavery and caste by profession and so forth. Color becomes important. Whitening of skin, lightening of skin, all over Africa, that becomes another issue to look at. But I don't want to stop here. I would say that is for the Black Lives Matter. I think one thing we have to pay attention to is that sometimes it is shaped by the systems of inequities, the systemic inequities within those countries itself. Were they along color line? In the context of Sudan, that is happening. The lighter color, northern elites are dominant, darker skin. So you feel like there was, even prior to Black Lives Matter, there's a movement towards a more Africanization. Even people with Arabic names, shedding them, adopting grandfathers and others, even in the northern part, African names. So there is that kind of tension between Arabism and Africanism. In Nigeria, there's much more support. There were demonstrations during Black Lives Matter. Several capitals actually experienced that. In some places like Algeria and others, they were all at the time involved, even though they're a very important civil society, they were involved in their own issues of democratization, this kind of an extension of what came to be known as the Arab Spring. So people were immersed in those, and so the issue of Black Lives Matter didn't take that shape. But globally, by the way, in the Arab world and other places, this brought in the issue of color back again into the surface. And minorities and so forth became much more vocal about that along color lines. But at the same time, it's interesting how it garnered a lot of support across color lines, is that the Black Lives Matter got the support of many communities that are light skinned or white or whatever. There is something global about it, in addition to questioning those. So I will end up here, but there was something that actually, sorry to be monopolizing this, but I was wondering if you look at the work of Hanouk Mesmer, who's actually, Elizabeth wrote about him. He's somewhat coming out of the church tradition, but crossed over into the modern. Unlike those people who come from the modern and then kind of entered into the church tradition. He comes out of this, and his visual vocabulary is much more interesting than the rest of the artists that I've witnessed lately. I'm not claiming any, knowledge of the Ethiopian scene that's in depth more than many of people here in this panel, but just an observation. Okay. Should I just stop here? Okay, I'll stop. And I didn't want to prolong this. I've been getting messages from Satan and others to end it because it's 15 minutes beyond the time of the panel, but that means there was really a lot of interesting interventions from the speakers and the participants, the members of the roundtable, and the panelists. So thanks for everyone. And with this, we end this. Satan, do you want to enter into just one more to tell people about next?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for this very engaging conversation. Seems everyone in the attendance enjoyed it just as much as I personally enjoyed it very much. So this concludes our session for today, our conference session for today. We will resume on Saturday, the 24th of October at 6 p.m. UAE local time with 2 sessions. Just to give you an idea about the sessions, the first is titled Writing Ethiopia, Identity and the Literary Imagination. It will be moderated by Professor Elizabeth Georges and will be joined by Lulyadi Tadassi Worku from Qatar University, journalist and writer Girma Fantaye, Dean of the College of Performing and Visual Arts at Addis Ababa University, Ezra Abate Yamam, and journalist and writer Aida Edemariam. The second session of that day is titled Modernity and Memory, Ethiopia's Histories, and will be moderated by Surafel Wandimo Abebe, Assistant Professor at Addis Ababa University, and will include Netzanet Gebre Michael Weldesenbet, who is a researcher at the Institute of Ethiopian Studies at Addis Ababa University, and Jonas Ashin, Assistant Professor at Addis Ababa University. We would like to remind all attendees to register for these panels, to have a login link, and for participants in the conference, please use the panelist link that we have shared with you. Thank you all, and we hope to see you on Saturday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Ciao.